Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains following week 6, and this was a pretty fun week as well, some pretty fun blindsides happening here, but we'll get to those soon enough. But there are 10 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 10, we have the first boot from this week, but here we have Sam, and Sam's downfall here was pretty expected for the most part. I didn't really have much faith in him to win the game, given the fact that his content didn't seem to have much purpose to it, and obviously with the villains holding the majority at this point, it just made sense for him to go out here. Now, at the end of the day, I feel like Sam played a pretty mediocre game, but we'll talk about that when we get to the eventual player ranking. But obviously, he wasn't really winning this season, so because of that, he is here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have the next boot to talk about, but here we have Shawnee, probably the biggest blindside of the season so far, where she was obviously taken out with an idol in her pocket. And Shawnee is obviously one of the better players from the season. I feel like she's going to be pretty high in the player ranking when we get around to it. And even from an edit perspective, I feel like she got relatively strong content throughout the season where she was consistently high up on my power rankings from week to week. However, I never quite felt comfortable putting her at number 1, simply because she had some really weird inconsistencies across her edit, where she had a pretty strong week 1, I'm not gonna lie there, but then in week 2, she had a pretty bad dry spell there during the Fraser round, which was the craziest tribal ever. She got no content there, which was a pretty big red flag there, so she had a pretty bad dry spell that was concerning. Now, she did have a bounce back during the post swap, which is pretty good, but even so, I felt like she was getting outpaced by George for a lot of it. And while I did put George above her, I still felt like Shawnee's edit wasn't the strongest in the world compared to George's. And obviously that culminates in her being taken out over George. And I even said during week 1 that I felt like this was a possibility where Shawnee was talking about keeping George around as a shield, but then over time, George would just become bigger and bigger as a player until he breaks out of that mold and starts to become his own player and is eventually responsible for Shawnee's downfall, which does happen. However, I will also acknowledge that I said that in the context of Simon winning and Simon being, on the right side of that, even though we'll talk more about Simon soon enough. But I did see that as a possibility, at least for George, becoming more than what Shawnee set him out to be. So obviously Shawnee going out here was a pretty big move, and I'm sure a lot of people are pretty devastated, but since she's out of the game now, I do have to drop her to number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have the final boot from this week, but here we have Shawn. And Shawn is another player that I know a lot of people had in pretty high contention for a lot of this season. However, I was never that high on Shawn, where I feel like he was always being set up for a downfall based on his content, based simply on the fact that he was being presented as the leader of this alpha male group, when it wasn't really being presented in a positive light. Now, I know that last season had an alpha male alliance largely dominate the game. However, I feel like the way that was presented in this season was a far cry from what was presented in Blood vs. Water, to where I felt like Shawn was eventually going to lose power and sort of become this underdog. Now, I did also say that at the time, I felt like Shawn was probably one of the stronger contenders of the people outside these Spice Girls, which I largely stood by for a lot of it. However, I'm not going to lie, he did kind of fumble edit-wise in the last week, where he got set up due to him saying that he had to play his idol at the right time, which explained why he didn't use it on Flick. But then he had the opportunity to save Sam during the tribal where Sam went out, but yet he decides to play it on himself for whatever reason. Now, yes, he did believe that the vote was being split on him and Nina, and also he didn't quite trust Haley, but still, the fact that Sam literally pleaded with him to play the idol on him, only for him to play the idol on himself, only to get no votes, in a situation where the edit was propping him up for waiting for the right time to play the idol, it was very bad, and I felt like from that point on, he was pretty dead in the edit. I had no confidence in him after that episode, and sure enough, he gets taken out by the end of the week. So on the whole, I did feel like Shawn played a pretty strong game for the most part, but he simply fell out of the majority after the merge and was never really able to recover from that point. So because of that, he is here at number 8. And with that, there are 7 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win, based on their edit and current game position. But at number 7, and again, I had to put a new person at the bottom here, I did decide to go with Matt here. And Matt's sort of an interesting case because he has been in the majority alliance for most of the game. However, I feel like other people left in the game, he probably has had the smallest edit, which is weird to say considering how much I've been praising him throughout the season for a strong week 1. However, ever since then, like, his content has been very inconsistent to where he does make a somewhat big move by flipping against the heroes post swap, which at the time felt to be pretty situational to where it was very possible he could have flipped back after the merge, especially considering that he seemed to be in a good position on that initial heroes try pre-swap, but then he just stays with the villains from the rest of the game on, and he never gets a chance to explain why he does that. Now, realistically, it probably makes sense from a game perspective, given that there are more big targets on the villain side, and plus, he probably would be better off competition-wise if he were to get to the end with the Jerrys and Stevies of the world. However, the fact that he doesn't get to explain at any point is a pretty big knock there, and plus, with other people going up, I can't really justify putting Matt too much higher here. I feel like he's more so the type of player that's going to get a spike in content towards the end game due to him being seen as very likable, being one of the few remaining heroes standing, and just be taken out because of that. So I don't feel like he's winning the game. I feel like the edit just isn't there. So because of that, he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another player that I don't feel like is winning the game at this point. However, they have surprised me to a degree, but here we have Simon. And I did consider putting Simon a little bit higher, all things considered, as he does seem to be, again, a pretty major character. However, I feel like he's been getting a largely dodo edit, and it's really funny just how he's unable to get on the right side of the vote, where despite him being presented as the swing vote, he's still in danger for a lot of it, and even in cases where he was in danger, he doesn't even vote correctly, where he votes for Sean, for example, during the round that Shawnee goes home. That's pretty bad. He's just out of the loop for a lot of this, and not to mention the fact that he's even been said to not have many friends in the game and that people don't seem to respect his game. And I could very easily see him just being dragged to the end as well, not really having a shot to win the game. So I feel like Simon is someone who just hasn't been getting his way. He's been sort of presented as a bit of a doofus, and I can't really have him too much higher because of that. But considering that he's gotten more content than Matt, I feel a bit more confident in Simon to get towards the end of the game, even though I still don't think he's probably going to win by the end of it. So because of that, he is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have another player that I am pretty confident is not winning the game at this point, but here we have Jerry. And again, Jerry is pretty unlikely to win the game, and it's really funny how since the merge, he really hasn't gotten any content, despite him being in the majority alliance. Now the reason I have him above Matt is I feel like he's more likely to get towards the end of the game. I feel like his edit throughout the season has been a bit more consistent, and I feel like there's a bit more positivity within his edit compared to a Simon who has been actively dunked on in the edit over and over again. But at the end of the day, I still don't see the win for him. I feel like despite him probably getting towards the end of the game, I don't feel like he's going to have the respect to win a jury vote. That in his relative lack of content in the post-merge does leave him here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have the first person on this list that I could legitimately see winning the game, even though I feel like the chances are somewhat slim. And I realize this may be a bit of a unpopular opinion considering the discourse I've been hearing online, but I did decide to go with Haley here. And it's sort of weird because ever since Shawnee's been voted out, I've been hearing more and more people say that Haley's probably going to win, that she's going to be the first 2-time winner and everything, that she's picking up on George's game and that she's going to cut him. However, I just don't see it that way, where despite her getting this content in the episode that's saying that she needs to start playing her own game, she still kind of goes along with George's game by the end of it. We have the Sean round where despite her claiming that she's getting a 1-up on George by throwing her vote onto Sean and ensuring that Sean goes home, George did vote for Shawn at that tribal, which again is probably a bit of a negative against George's edit. However, it's not exactly a positive for Haley's edit as some people claim it to be. And I feel like with the drought in content that she's been getting more recently up to this week, I feel like this is more so her being set up to be one of the next few boots. I would be very shocked if she were to get towards the end of the game or to actually get a 1-up on George, as I feel like it's more than likely that she's just going to try to take the shot only for it to backfire and for her to be taken out. And even beyond that, I feel like there's enough holes in her edit to where I don't really see her winning the game. And I feel like if she were winning the game, that the edit would be going way more out of its way to be propping her up, considering that she would be the first 2-time winner. I feel like Australian Survivor of all shows would not want to be presenting its first 2-time winner in such a understated way. So because of that, I don't really think that Haley's going to win this game. I feel like she's just being set up to be a boot in the next couple of rounds. So it's because of that I can't really have her too much higher because of that. However, it's the fact that she has a bit more win equity within the game compared to people like a Simon or Jerry. And she has been getting slightly more content than Matt, to where I did have to leave her here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and this person did jump up quite a bit considering where I had them last week. However, I still don't think they're likely to win per se, but here we have Nina. And Nina has kind of surprised me in this past week, where I feel like she's kind of taken over the Shawn role of being the most likely winner outside the current majority alliance. Now, within that, there are some misplays, like I don't love her move to play the idol on herself, the very first tribal after she finds it, where despite it kind of making sense from a game perspective, where she was under the impression that the votes being split between her and Shawn, on the show at least when I was watching it, it came off more as her just playing an idol just to check it off her bucket list, where she was just so excited to have that moment where she gets up and plays the idol, especially at a tribal where she wasn't really in danger. So again, she just kind of gets outplayed there. And outside of that, she's been getting brought a bit more. She's been shown to be a bit of an underdog, sort of someone who's been sort of flying on by. And that could lead to something. However, more than likely, I think she's sort of in a similar spot to Haley, where I feel like if it's not Haley that's the next boot, I feel like Nina is also pretty likely to be taken out in the next couple of rounds, especially considering the gaps in content for her in the pre-merge. But it's the fact that she's been brought up more as his underdog as of late that does leave her a bit higher than Haley. I feel like Nina's being set up less so for a downfall compared to Haley, where I feel like it's very blatant for Haley, whereas it's a bit less likely for Nina, especially before Haley. But I still feel like Nina's going to come up short by the end of it. So because of that, she's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and it's obviously the 2 remaining Spice Girls in the game. These are the 2 people that I feel very confident will win the game at this point. However, in an interesting twist, the order has shifted a little bit. But at number 2, I actually decided to bump down George. And this is an interesting choice because George is someone who has continuously eluded me throughout the season. And I feel like that largely applies to this week, where he has been propped up to such a large degree where everyone in the game is talking about how big of a threat they are. George himself has said how he's in a good position, how he is poised to win this game. And all of this exudes a lot of confidence. And, some of that could just be George being George. However, it does make me a bit more worried that George could just end up being like the fallen angel this season, or someone that gets towards the end of the game but is sort of the final obstacle for the eventual winner to take out. I feel like despite Australian Survivor leaning so much and just giving the winner as much content as possible, there is this element that George could be set up for a downfall here, and that worries me to where I can't really have him at number 1 at this point. Now, I don't think he'll be in the next boot. I think he'll get his way, particularly if we see Haley or Nina try to stage a revolution per se. But I feel like by the final 4, maybe the final 5, maybe even final 3 if this season ends up being a final 2, that I could see George just getting taken out. And we'll talk about that more in a moment with the number 1 person. But it's that concern that I have, especially after this batch of episodes, that did cause me to bump him down to number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains at this moment is Liz. And I feel kind of weird putting Liz at number 1, as I never really had her in that high contention compared to the other Spice Girls. I feel like she has been the most understated of the Spice Girls. And before this past week, I did hold that against her to a large degree. However, after this week, I actually feel kind of good about her. Now, some of this is baked in my long-held assumption that a Spice Girl is going to win this season, and I still hold that assumption. I mean, Spice Girls are literally the top of my list, and I feel like no one outside these Spice Girls have really done anything to make me put them over them. However, as time has passed, and especially after the Shawnee boot, I'm actually feeling okay about Liz. I feel like while she has been a bit understated up to this point, I really liked her confessional in this most recent episode, where she reacts to the Shawnee blindside, how she gets very emotional during it. She knows that George is behind it, And she has this very interesting confessional where she says that she's gonna bide her time, stick with the alliance for the time being, until it's time for her to take her shot against George. And this really got me to think, has this been her storyline throughout the season? Now, obviously, she's been shown to be with Shawnee a lot, and while Liz herself has not gotten many confessionals, there is this element that Shawnee could have been teaching her throughout the game, and that now that Shawnee is out, it's time for Liz to really step up and to be her own player, to really branch out per se. And I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to do so. And yes, while her confessional about biding her time was really her only confessional in the episode, it kind of made sense considering that she's still technically within the majority alliance, and that maybe next week she could be more responsible for really getting her game going. That could really explain why she's able to take out George and by in turn win the game. I feel like if there's anyone that's going to be able to take out George and get the credit for it, it's probably going to be Liz. I mean, yes, while Haley and Nina have been set up to be these underdogs that could eventually get their way, and I guess Simon to a degree, I feel like Liz is the most poised to actually be successful in doing so. And if that is to happen, I think Liz is the most likely person to get the credit for it. I feel like she's the person that's most likely going to get respect for it. And I feel like she's the most likely person to actually turn that into her winning a jury vote at the end. So I feel like, all things considered, I guess I'm going to take a risk here and put Liz at number one. Now, obviously, we'll see what happens, but I feel like based on what I feel after seeing what happened with George and with Liz to a degree, I did decide to put Liz here at number one. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps with the channel. I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. Survivor 44 is in full swing at this point, so you can expect more content on that as well. Big Brother Canada 11 has also started, so be sure to check in for content on that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.